I never thought a single sentence could shatter the life I had quietly built, but the moment I overheard plans being made for my future, without my voice, without my consent, something inside me cracked. Betrayal does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it slips into your home on soft footsteps, wearing the face of someone you trusted. That day, I felt the ground shift beneath me, forcing me to confront a truth I could no longer ignore. And from that fracture, a story began, one of fear, awakening, and the fight to reclaim my own life. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let's begin. My name is Margaret Hill, and at 68 years old, I have grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of my life on the Oregon coast. My days begin before anyone else in the house wakes. I warm a kettle, steep a cup of chamomile tea, and step out onto the back porch to watch the tide roll across Cannon Beach. The mornings here always feel gentle, even when the cold wind stings my cheeks. The sea has been my companion since Thomas passed 7 years ago, a steady reminder that some things endure, even when the people you love do not. Life in my small, cedar-sided home has remained mostly unchanged over the years. I tend to the hydrangeas that Thomas planted, trimming each branch with care, as though keeping our past alive one petal at a time. I sweep sand from the porch steps, write in my journal, and take long walks along the shoreline when the world is still half asleep. I like order. I like predictable days. I like the silence that lets me think. But silence is rare now. My son, Daniel, moved back home almost a year ago after separating from his wife. Melissa came with him, claiming she needed temporary stability. They insisted the arrangement would be short, yet months passed and they remained, bringing their tension into a house built on gentler memories. Daniel tries to be polite, but grief and a failure have dulled something in him. Melissa behaves graciously in front of neighbors, yet speaks to me with an edge that slices more sharply than she realizes. Only Lily, my 10-year-old granddaughter, brings warmth into the home. She draws constantly, sketching the sea, the birds, even the shadows of our furniture. She has Thomas's peaceful eyes. Our town of Cannon Beach is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else. People greet you by name at the market, and the woman at the bakery already knows which scone I prefer. During the holiday season, the streets glow with lights. The local shops set out cinnamon candles, and tourists pose for photographs near the giant monolith rising from the water. I used to love decorating for Christmas, placing each handmade ornament where Thomas and I always did. This year, I placed them alone. While hanging garlands along the staircase rail, I heard Melissa in the hallway. Her voice was low, tense, hurried, but she cut the conversation short when she noticed me. Later that evening, Daniel asked whether I had considered moving somewhere easier. He spoke softly, trying not to alarm me, yet something in his tone stirred unease inside my chest. I assured him I was fine, but doubt lingered long after he left the room. Despite the strain, I continued preparing for Christmas as I always had. I made ginger cookies using Thomas's old recipe, polished the wooden angels he carved, and placed them carefully on the mantel. Yet beneath the familiar motions, I felt an unusual heaviness, as though the house itself sensed a change approaching. The atmosphere seemed charged, the air thicker, the rooms quieter. On the night before the first snowfall, I stepped out onto the porch and looked toward the restless Pacific. Wind whipped through my hair, and the sky carried a weight that made me shiver. Something was shifting, subtle but undeniable. I rested my hand on the railing Thomas built with his own hands and breathed in the sharp scent of winter. I did not yet know that the coming holiday would split my life into before and after. I only knew that the wind felt different, and for the first time in years, my home did not feel entirely mine. If you're still watching and this opening pulled you in, comment number 1 below so I know you're right here with me. Now stay close. Chapter 2 is where the first cracks begin to show. The first real cold of December settled over the house the next morning, the kind of cold that made the floorboards creak as though the wood itself felt uneasy. I rose early, as I always did, and moved quietly through the kitchen while the sky outside remained a soft gray. The kettle hummed low, sending ribbons of steam into the air. Yet something about the morning felt different, as though the house was bracing for something it could not name. Daniel came downstairs first. His steps were slow, heavy, the way a man moves when his thoughts weigh more than his body. He greeted me with a strained smile. I could sense a restlessness in him, a worry he kept buried beneath polite silence. When he thought I was not looking, I saw him pinch the bridge of his nose as if trying to steady himself. He murmured something under his breath about things settling soon, but he did not offer more. The words drifted in the cold kitchen air, unsettling in their vagueness. Melissa followed a few minutes later, wearing an expression that felt too bright for such a muted morning. She asked whether I needed help preparing breakfast, a gesture so out of character that it sent a faint ripple of suspicion through me. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were sharp, moving around the room as though assessing something. When I turned away to grab a cloth, I caught her gaze slip into something colder, calculating. The softness vanished just as quickly when she saw me watching. After breakfast, while Daniel left for work and Melissa retreated upstairs, I moved to the living room to tidy up. As I gathered blankets near the sofa, a faint murmur drifted from the hallway. Melissa was in Daniel's small office. Her tone was low, urgent, but not low enough to hide her words. She said something about a plan finishing right after the holiday. Then she said a sentence that rooted me to the floor. She said it would not be difficult because she never fights back. The meaning was vague, but the intent was unmistakable. A chill deeper than winter wind crept down my spine. Lily sat at the dining table, sketchbook open in front of her. She watched the hallway the entire time Melissa spoke, as though she too sensed the tension behind the closed door. When Melissa finally stepped out with a forced smile, Lily turned to me. She asked softly whether I thought her mother was acting different lately. I hesitated, but the earnest concern in her eyes told me she had noticed far more than a child her age should. Later that afternoon, I found Melissa bent over a drawer in my study. She straightened abruptly when she heard my footsteps. She claimed she was searching for colored pencils for Lily, but the drawer she rifled through contained only my personal documents. She closed it quickly, too quickly, as if afraid I might see what she had touched. I felt a flicker of dread rise beneath my ribs. The feeling only deepened during dinner. The house was still, almost expectant, while the wind pressed against the windows. Melissa set her fork down and announced in a tone far too smooth that this Christmas would be unlike any other. Daniel stared at his plate, avoiding my eyes, his silence louder than any confession. I sat there in the dim light, listening to the quiet clatter of dishes, and for the first time, I understood with absolute certainty that a storm was gathering around me, one I had not yet seen clearly, but could feel tightening its grip. If you're still watching and feeling the tension building, comment number 2 below to let me know you're following every clue. Now let's step into chapter 3, where the real trouble begins. Christmas morning should have brought warmth, the smell of cinnamon, and the gentle chaos of family moving through the house. Instead, the silence felt heavy, almost metallic, as though the air itself had sharpened overnight. I rose early, as I always did, and moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing breakfast out of habit more than celebration. Something inside me already sensed that this Christmas would be unlike the others I had known. As I carried a tray of pastries toward the living room, I slowed near the doorway. Daniel and Melissa were speaking in low voices, but the room was so still that their words traveled clearly. Melissa's tone carried the smooth confidence of someone delivering a final decision. She said that after Christmas, I would be moving to a nursing home. She said it as though she were announcing the delivery time of a package. There was no hesitation, no kindness, only certainty. Daniel did not answer at first. I waited for him to defend me, to correct her, to show a hint of the boy I raised. Instead, there was a long pause. And when he finally spoke, his words were too soft to carry comfort. He simply told her they would handle it soon. That was all. It was enough to steal the breath from my lungs. For a moment, I stood frozen behind the doorway, my fingers tightening around the wooden tray. Their conversation washed over me like cold ocean water, pulling me under. This was my home, the place Thomas and I built with our hands and our hopes, and yet they spoke of removing me as though I were a misplaced chair. The pain did not come all at once. It leaked slowly through my chest, spreading like frost across a window pane. When Melissa entered the kitchen a few minutes later, she carried the brightness of someone pleased with herself. She moved lightly, humming softly while reaching for plates. She spoke about finding a good place for older people, a place she described as clean and convenient. Her words floated in the room, each one brushing against me like an insult. She did not know I had heard everything, and she smiled as though we were sharing a pleasant morning. Beneath that smile was something cold, something that now made perfect sense. Daniel entered after her, quieter, heavier, avoiding my eyes as if they held too many questions. He moved around the kitchen without purpose, touching objects he did not need to touch. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a thin layer of guilt. He told me they only wanted what was best for me. Nothing in his tone suggested he believed the words, yet he said them anyway. That was almost harder to bear than Melissa's cruelty. I finished preparing breakfast in silence, the motions mechanical, my thoughts sharp and unsettled. My mind replayed the past few days, Melissa's sudden politeness, her glances toward the hallway, her strange phone calls, the drawer she closed too quickly in my study. Every detail rearranged itself into a clearer picture, one I wished I could unsee. Later that morning, after the food had gone cold on untouched plates, I sat alone in the living room. The Christmas lights blinked softly beside Thomas's wooden ornaments. The house felt smaller, tighter, as though walls were inching inward. I held a cup of warm tea between my palms and stared at the quiet room, feeling something inside me shift. Not anger, not grief. Something firmer, a quiet promise forming beneath the hurt. I realized then that I would not allow anyone, not even my own son, to decide the course of my life. The storm had arrived, but I would not be swept away by it. If you're still watching and can sense the storm forming, comment number 3 below, so I know you're holding on tight. Now, move with me into Chapter 4. Things are about to escalate. The morning after Christmas arrived with a dull ache in the air, a heaviness that seemed to settle into the walls themselves. I woke before sunrise, though my sleep had been fractured and thin. The house felt colder than usual, as if the warmth of the holiday had been drained away and replaced with a quiet tension. I moved through the hallway slowly, trying to steady myself. I knew I could not afford to react impulsively. If I wanted to understand what Melissa and Daniel had planned, I needed to observe carefully. When Melissa left late that morning to run errands, I found Daniel in the living room. He sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at a coffee mug he was not drinking from. I sensed an opportunity to speak with him while his guard was down. I asked gently about how he was feeling, about the future, about whether everything in the house was truly fine. He shifted uncomfortably and offered vague reassurances that did not match the worry in his eyes. He said something about wanting everyone to be safe, but he avoided addressing anything directly. The more he dodged my questions, the more certain I became that he felt trapped between loyalty and pressure. Later that afternoon, I climbed the stairs to return folded sheets to the linen closet. As I passed Daniel's small study, I saw the door half open and Melissa inside. She stood with a stack of papers in her hands, flipping through them with a practiced focus. The drawer of the filing cabinet behind her was open, revealing folders of property deeds and tax records. When she noticed me in the doorway, she shut the drawer quickly and claimed she was looking for an old receipt. Her polite smile was thin enough to see through. I felt a pulse of alarm rise beneath my ribs as I walked away. After she left the study, I slipped inside and began to check the drawers where I kept my important documents. My hands trembled slightly as I inspected each envelope. The folder containing the deed to my home had been moved. The envelope where I kept cash for emergencies was unsealed. Nothing was missing yet, but the disturbance alone was enough to confirm my fears. Melissa was not merely planning to push me into a nursing home. She was preparing for control. The weight of that realization pressed on me as the day went on. By late afternoon, I found Melissa in the kitchen and asked her casually if she had noticed anything strange around the house. Her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. She replied with a tone that questioned my memory, suggesting gently that older people sometimes misremember things. I recognized the tactic immediately. She was laying groundwork, shaping a narrative in which my mind could not be trusted. It chilled me more deeply than the winter wind outside. While I tried to steady myself, Lily approached me later with a drawing. She held it out silently, waiting for my reaction. The drawing showed Melissa near the front door, speaking with a tall man whose features Lily captured with surprising clarity. I felt something twist inside my chest. Lily had seen something Melissa had tried to keep hidden. I hugged her softly, grateful for the quiet truth she carried in her small hands. That evening, when the house grew still, I stood in my study once more. The drawer remained slightly ajar, a stark reminder of how close the thread had crept. I touched the edge of the folder containing the deed and felt a resolve settling deep within me. My early attempts had failed, but they had opened my eyes. I would need a different strategy, something sharper, something unshakable, and I would need it soon. If you're still watching and the story's pulling you deeper, comment number 4 below to show you're still here. Now get ready. Chapter 5 pushes everything to the edge. That evening, when the last trace of daylight slipped behind the dark line of the ocean, I asked everyone to join me in the living room. I said it was time to watch old Christmas videos, the ones Thomas had filmed years ago. My voice was steady, almost gentle, though inside me something churned like a rising tide. Daniel nodded without looking at me. Melissa hesitated for a moment, as if sensing a shift she could not name, before settling onto the sofa with a carefully arranged smile. Lily sat close to my side, her sketchbook resting on her lap like a small shield. The room was dim, except for the glow of the Christmas lights draped across the mantel. I moved slowly, giving myself time to breathe, to steady the tremor that wanted to rise in my hands. I had prepared for this. Before calling them in, I had replaced the holiday recording with the audio clip I had collected. I had checked the file twice, then again, ensuring there would be no mistake. Tonight would not be about celebration. It would be about truth. When I pressed play, the screen brightened for a moment before turning black. Then Melissa's voice filled the room. It was sharp, precise, and painfully familiar. She said the words she believed would remain hidden. She said that once I was out of the house, everything would be handled. She spoke of my home as though it were an item to be packaged and redistributed. She spoke of my worth as though it had been reduced to a dollar amount. Daniel stiffened. His fingers curled tightly against his knees. His face lost its color, and he stared at the floor as if it might offer escape. Melissa froze, the smile draining from her lips, leaving her expression flat and brittle. For a moment, she only blinked, as though unable to process that her own voice was echoing back at her. Then she reacted. She'd stood abruptly, denying the recording, insisting that the audio must have been edited or manipulated. She spoke rapidly, layering excuses one after another, suggesting that memory can be unreliable, that misunderstandings happen, that older people sometimes confuse things. Each word was delivered with an urgency that betrayed the fear she tried to hide. She turned to Daniel, reaching for his arm as if she could pull him back under her control. But Daniel did not lift his eyes. He looked broken, shaken in a way I had never seen. The silence between us was painful, and yet it was the clearest answer I could have asked for. He could not defend her. He could no longer pretend that what was unraveling in front of him was anything but the truth. In the middle of the chaos, Lily rose from her seat. She walked forward quietly, her small footsteps soft against the rug. She looked at me first, then at her parents. Then she said the sentence that sliced through the room more sharply than any recording ever could. She said she had seen her mother talking to a man at the front door the week before. She said it calmly, as if it were a simple fact she had drawn from the world around her. She opened her sketchbook and held it up. On the page was a drawing of Melissa standing beside a tall man whose features were drawn with startling accuracy. His posture, his coat, the way he stood in the doorway, it was all there, captured by a child who noticed everything. Melissa's face tightened. Fear flickered across her eyes before she masked it with anger. She denied the drawing, denied Lily's memory, denied everything, but her voice trembled and her hands shook. She reached for Daniel again, and again he pulled back instinctively. I felt the pain of betrayal pulse through me, yet an unexpected calm settled over my chest. I rose slowly from my chair and walked to the television. I switched off the screen, letting the room fall into quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the heater and the distant crash of waves against the shore. I turned to face Melissa. I did not speak. I did not need to. The truth was already out, and the silence that followed was the final blow. I stood in the center of my living room, the air still heavy with the echoes of the confrontation that had happened minutes before. The screen was dark now, but the silence it left behind felt fuller than any sound. Melissa sat on the far end of the couch, shoulders drawn tight, lips pressed into a thin line, as if she could hold her entire world together through sheer restraint. Daniel hovered near the doorway, pale and shaken, looking like a man who had been pushed abruptly into consciousness after years of choosing not to see. I watched him rub his palms together, a gesture he used to make as a nervous boy, and for a moment he looked impossibly young again. I walked to my small office at the end of the hall. It had once been my sanctuary, the place where I kept journals, old family photographs, and the small things that anchored me when life felt uncertain. Tonight, it felt like a courtroom. I opened the desk drawer and took out the folder I had prepared for this exact moment. Inside it were copies of every odd detail that had nagged my instinct for months. Notes about Melissa, searching through my belongings, a timeline of the days when papers in my study were disturbed, and photographs showing the mortgage documents that had been moved. I held them against my chest for a breath before returning to the living room. Daniel looked up as I entered. I placed the file gently on the coffee table between us. His gaze flickered from the folder to my face, searching for any sign of anger. Instead, I let calm carry me. I had already spent too many years letting other people decide the tone of my life. I told them what I had seen. I explained how Melissa had spoken to her friend on the phone, how she planned to have me declared incompetent, how the forged mortgage documents had nearly slipped past me. I kept my voice steady and low, not accusing, simply stating the truth that had waited too long to be spoken. My hands did not tremble as I unfolded each page and placed it before them. Daniel picked up the first document. His thumb brushed the corner of the page, and I saw the moment recognition overtook denial. One sheet led to the next, the handwriting analysis showing the forged signatures, the records showing unauthorized access to my files, and the drawings that Lily had unknowingly created as witness accounts. His breathing grew shallow, and the room seemed to press inward around him until he finally lowered the papers and let his shoulders fall. He whispered a single word, almost too soft to hear, and Melissa reacted instantly. She rose from the couch, tried to push the papers away from him, and tried to reach for his arm. Her voice cracked as she insisted that everything was a misunderstanding, that I was confused, that he should not trust what he saw. Her grip tightened on his sleeve, her face twisting with urgency. But something had shifted inside him. He gently pulled his arm free. Daniel stood straighter than I had seen in years. His voice was soft, but unmistakably resolute as he told her he believed me. That single decision felt like the sound of a lock turning somewhere deep in our lives, something long stuck finally coming loose. Melissa staggered back as if the ground had shifted under her. I turned toward the window and let the weight of the moment settle. For the first time in decades, I felt firmly in control of my life. I told them I would contact an attorney in the morning. Daniel nodded, offering help before I even asked. Outside, the Pacific waves rolled steadily toward the shore, each one a reminder that even the strongest storms eventually break and retreat. I stood there, letting the rhythm steady my breath, and understood that this choice marked the start of reclaiming everything that had once been mine. If you're still watching and that turning point hit hard, comment number 6 below, so I know you felt it too. Now let's keep going. Chapter 7 reveals the fallout. The morning light crept slowly across my bedroom ceiling, thin and pale, as if even the sun hesitated to enter the house after what had unfolded the night before. I woke with a heaviness in my chest, the kind that settles deep and does not lift easily. When I sat on the edge of the bed, the silence struck me first. It was not the peaceful kind I once cherished. It was the rigid, brittle silence of a home holding its breath. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt the shift immediately. The energy of the house had changed. The air had a strange tension to it, like the moments after a storm has passed, but the smell of lightning still lingers. Doors were half closed instead of open. Footsteps were quiet instead of natural. Even the wood floor seemed to creak differently, as if the house itself understood that the truth had torn something open. Melissa was in the kitchen when I walked in. She did not turn around. She moved stiffly, placing dishes into cabinets with unnecessary force. Her posture was rigid, her shoulders lifted as though bracing for impact. She did not greet me. She did not attempt small talk. She simply acted as if I were a shadow passing through a room she no longer claimed with confidence. Her silence said more than any argument could. She knew she had lost control. Every so often, I caught glimpses of her darting glances, sharp and narrow, filled with resentment she could not voice. Her footsteps followed me down the hall more than once, not close enough to be openly suspicious, but close enough for me to feel watched. She had become someone cornered, someone waiting for the world she built to collapse around her. Daniel sat at the dining table, elbows on his knees, staring at a spot on the floor. His face looked worn older than it had the day before. He had not slept. I could see that clearly in the soft swelling beneath his eyes and the way he pressed his palms against his forehead as if trying to rub away regret. He was trapped in a maze of guilt, and every turn confronted him with the realization that he had ignored signs he should have noticed. When I approached, he lifted his head, but could not hold my gaze. His shame radiated from him in waves, filling the room with an ache I could not ignore. The weight of everything was crushing him, and yet he remained silent, wrestling with truths that reshaped the foundation of his family. Lily moved quietly through the space, holding her sketchbook to her chest. She watched all of us in that perceptive way she always did, absorbing the fractured landscape of our home. Later, she showed me a drawing she had made that morning. It depicted the three of us standing far apart in a room colored in muted grays, with lines drawn between us like fragile threads threatening to snap. She did not say anything about it, but the meaning was unmistakable. She felt the divide. She saw the cracks. Meals became strange rituals of distance. Everyone sat in their usual seats, but no one spoke unless absolutely necessary. Melissa avoided my eyes. Daniel barely touched his food. Lily looked back and forth, her little brow furrowed with confusion she was too young to articulate. At one point, I saw Melissa moving quietly through the hallway, gathering a few personal items and tucking them into a bag she kept partly hidden. It was not enough to leave, but enough to suggest she was preparing herself for whatever consequence might come next. She understood better than any of us how much damage had been done. When the evening finally settled in, I stood near the living room window and watched a thin layer of frost begin to form on the glass. The world outside looked cold and distant, yet strangely calm. Inside, the air felt thick with anticipation. We were no longer in the phase of secrets. The battle had shifted into something exposed and unavoidable. I understood then that this was only the beginning. The consequences of truth do not unfold all at once. They ripple slowly, reshaping everything they touch. The next morning arrived shrouded in a soft blanket of fog that clung to the windows and muted the colors of the coastline. I woke with a mix of exhaustion and resolve, the kind that forms only after a night spent replaying every detail in the mind. The house was still tense, but inside me something had shifted. I knew I could no longer wait for circumstances to correct themselves. If I wanted my life protected, I had to be the one to take the first true step. As I moved through the quiet rooms, I could feel the remnants of turmoil lingering in the air. Yet there was also clarity settling in my thoughts. I understood that confrontation alone was not enough. Melissa would not give up easily, and guilt alone would not guide Daniel toward the choices he needed to make. I required a structured plan, one rooted not in emotion but in law and preparation. With that in mind, I retrieved the folder of documents I had gathered and the notes I had written in the days leading up to the confrontation. My hands felt steady for the first time in weeks. By late morning, I drove to a small office near the Santa Barbara shoreline, a place I had visited only once before. It belonged to an old friend of my late husband, a retired attorney who still handled select cases. His office was simple and warm, the scent of worn books and old leather filling the air. He listened without interrupting as I shared everything that had happened. When I placed the drawings, the documents, and the timeline before him, he studied them with a frown that deepened as he read. He confirmed what I suspected. This was not merely tension within a household, but a pattern of elder financial manipulation. He outlined a list of steps I needed to take immediately. I should protect my accounts, secure my documents, notify financial institutions of potential fraud, and ensure Melissa no longer had unrestricted access to anything involving my property. His confidence strengthened my own resolve. While reviewing my financial records, he discovered something I had not expected. There was a loan in my name, processed online several weeks earlier. The amount was significant enough that it could endanger the house if left unpaid. I felt cold settle through my body as I recognized what it implied. Melissa had not only planned to remove me from my home, but also attempted to create debt that would force its sale. The attorney assured me that because the loan was fraudulent, it could be contested and frozen, but the discovery deepened the urgency of my situation. After leaving the office, I spent the afternoon securing everything I could. I changed all my banking passwords, froze my credit, and moved the most important documents to a new safe deposit box at the bank. Each task felt like reclaiming a part of myself, brick by brick reinforcing the walls Melissa had tried to weaken. When I returned home, Daniel was sitting in the dimly lit living room, looking lost, but willing to listen. I spoke gently, reminding him that Lily deserved stability and safety. He nodded, acknowledging that he needed to take responsibility and step into the role he had avoided for far too long. Later, Lily approached me with another drawing. It showed Melissa holding a phone with an angry expression, next to a small symbol resembling a bank. It was innocent, almost childlike, yet it added to the growing picture of Melissa's intentions. In the quiet of that evening, I looked out toward the ocean, watching the fog lift in thin strands. For the first time in what felt like ages, I felt a faint glimmer of hope. I was no longer simply enduring. I was preparing, protecting, and moving toward a future where my life was once again my own. If you're still watching and the pieces are finally coming together, comment number 8 below, so I know you're ready for the truth. Now follow me. Next comes the ending you've been waiting for. The morning carried a tense stillness that wrapped itself around the house like fog refusing to lift. I moved quietly through the rooms, collecting every document, every note, and every piece of evidence that had brought us to this moment. My hands were steady, but my breath carried the weight of finality. I knew that by the end of the day, nothing in this home would be the same. It was time to end what had been festering in silence for far too long. When the doorbell rang, I felt a ripple of certainty rise in me. My attorney stepped inside with a folder tucked beneath his arm, his expression calm and firm. Daniel stood near the window, hands clasped, as if bracing himself for impact. Melissa appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale, her posture rigid. She walked down slowly, each step hollow against the wood, sensing she was walking into something she could no longer manipulate. We gathered in the living room. The attorney opened the folder and began laying out the evidence piece by piece. He spoke with measured clarity, describing the forged documents, the unauthorized loan application, the attempts to remove me from my own home through manipulation and deceit. With every word, Melissa's face shifted from defiance to disbelief, then to panic. She pressed her hands together as if trying to hold herself upright. Her voice trembled as she tried to defend herself, grasping for excuses, speaking about pressure and misunderstandings. She turned desperately toward Daniel, hoping he would rescue her the way he had in the past, but Daniel did not move. He stood tall, sorrow carved into his features, and shook his head. The choice he made days earlier stood firm. He would not shield her anymore. A knock sounded at the door, and when it opened, a representative from the bank stepped inside. He confirmed the fraudulent loan request, pointing directly to the digital trail that led back to Melissa. The room sank into silence as the truth solidified beyond denial. Melissa lowered her gaze, her shoulders collapsing inward. Whatever illusion she had created around herself shattered completely. My attorney informed her that she was required to leave the house immediately, under the laws protecting victims of elder financial abuse. She stared at him, then at Daniel, then at the floor, as if searching for a version of reality in which she still had control, but there was none left to grasp. She gathered her belongings mechanically, her suitcase wheels drumming a heavy rhythm along the hall. Lily stood near the stairs, clutching her sketchbook, watching with wide, quiet eyes. Melissa did not look back as she crossed the threshold and stepped into the daylight, the door closing behind her with a finality that vibrated through the walls. The silence that followed was different from the silence of fear. It was the silence of release. Daniel sank onto the couch, tears slipping down his face, a mixture of relief and grief for the life he thought he had. Lily climbed onto his lap, wrapping her arms around him, anchoring him back to what remained true. I stood near the window, watching the sky above Santa Barbara brighten for the first time in weeks. The storm had passed. The air felt clearer. And though the road ahead was still long, the darkest chapter had finally come to an end. The morning sun rose gently over Santa Barbara, casting soft golden light across the rooms of my home. For the first time in weeks, the silence felt peaceful instead of tense. The air was lighter, as if the house itself had finally released a long, exhausted sigh. I stood by the window and let the stillness settle around me, grateful for the calm that had returned. As I moved through the house, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The journey from fear to truth had been painful, but it had also shown me a strength I had forgotten I possessed. I thought about the moment I overheard Melissa's cruel intentions, the quiet dread of watching my world shift, and the courage it took to finally confront the danger right inside my own home. Growing older did not make me weak. It made me aware, experienced, and resilient. Later that afternoon, Daniel and I sat together on the front porch. He apologized again, his voice thick with regret. I placed my hand over his and told him that people can lose their way, but they can also find their way back if they choose to. Forgiveness does not come from forgetting, but from understanding. He nodded, and I saw a steadiness return to his expression. Lily ran through the yard with her sketchbook, her laughter bright and free. She showed me a new drawing of our family standing beneath the sun, holding hands. It felt like a small but powerful sign that healing was already beginning. I looked out toward the shimmering line of the ocean and breathed in the salt-tinged air. I had survived manipulation, betrayal, and fear, and I had reclaimed not only my home, but also my sense of self. The message was clear. No matter our age, we have the right and the power to protect our lives, our dignity, and our future. The storm had passed. What remained was a horizon filled with quiet possibility. In the quiet that follows hardship, we often discover the deepest truths about resilience. Life has a way of testing the edges of our strength, pushing us to confront what we would rather avoid. Yet it is in those moments, when stability cracks and illusions fall away, that clarity finally arrives. Hard seasons reveal what is worth holding on to, what must be released, and how courage can rise even in the most fragile hearts. Every ending carries a lesson, and every struggle reshapes us into someone wiser, steadier, and more aware of our own value. May this story remind us that dignity is worth protecting, and that no one is ever too old or too tired to reclaim their voice. Thank you for spending time with this journey. If it moved you, please share your thoughts in the comments, and remember to follow and subscribe for more stories ahead.